member and the leader came to me, and if people know Islington, you know that we've done loads of commissions before. We did started off a fairness commission, they did an employment commission, and the leader and the council exec member wanted a children's commission. And as usual, when you kind of start off with that, you kind of think, oh, do you know what? You don't want it to be just anything to satisfy the political needs. And so I needed to kind of think about with them, okay, what is it that we need to think about in terms of supporting children's well-being and building resilience, including issues such as the built environment, community safety and protection, housing, economic development. And actually, this goes beyond one department, such as children's services. So what I'm going to just go through here is why we set up the commission rather than pursuing the child-friendly communities accreditation that you can get through UNICEF. But I also want to give you, to feed into the conversations that you're going to have in your breakout groups, opportunity to think about the key challenges in your area and just reflect on how, and given the kind of changing political and financial landscape, public service leaders can use their powers, their resources to really build environments for children to thrive. So, you know, first of all, like let's be real about the social reality for children, young people. Politically, democratically, they just really get a raw deal, if we're honest with you. They're often seen as a problem to fix. They're not taxpayers yet, they can't vote, so there's no one really to represent them democratically on what matters to them or their futures. And they usually have to wait to be given a voice or a vote through their parents or people who then believe in them to set up various structures such as youth councils and youth forums too. Within that context, it's just kind of just reflecting for us in terms of local governance, what it really means. And aside from delivering the services, as it says there, we have a role as community leaders, facilitators and advocates, but we should also be thinking about how we build the social capital for the long-term change. So making sure that we're constantly creating situations for people to have a voice, have a stake in their local areas, and where they want to influence something, they can actually do that. Again, while I was thinking from it, I need to kind of start from a base of actually the necessary social and health development of all children and young people is everybody's business. So Children Act 2004 placed a statutory duty on all local authorities to lead those cooperation arrangements that improve the 5 statutory children's wellbeing outcomes. They still exist. They're still enshrined in law. We still have a duty to actually carry this out. So it's worth bearing that in mind when you're thinking about these things. And what you'll find is that most of these are beyond the responsibility of children's services departments. It's about place, but it's also about what the rest of the council is doing too. So we're, you know, if people know Islington, you know, we've got really brilliant parks, museums, sports facilities, we've got cultural venues right on our doorstep, but also unemployment, cost of living, access to affordable housing and health, they really do push some of those opportunities out of reach for some of our families. And we don't have a situation where there's a clear demarcation between poorer or affluent areas. So as a consequence, you've got richer and poorer people just often living parallel lives right next to each other. So we needed to start thinking about how could we reimagine a child and youth friendly Islington to make it a great place to grow up, learn, work and have fun in. And that's where the Commission got involved, because they were asked to explore and identify what that shared commitment and framework, but more fundamentally the practical solutions that everybody could play a part in and developing, making Islington that great place that we were talking about, and therefore start promoting some of the social and health development that was required in early childhood, the middle years and adolescence and youth adulthood. And we also asked them to help us consider the partnership approach for strategy and investment and collaboration too, as well as the place leadership was going to be required from all partners to realise that vision. This should be quite familiar to some of you. So in terms of redesigning our approach to children and young people in Islington, we needed to shift from particular services to having an emphasis on systems, but also having an emphasis on the different things, the different well-being or resilience outcomes that were needed at each of those life course stages in terms of early childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. Anyone who's done child development or even just life course development knows that you need different things, there's different relationships, there's different interactions that happen at each of those stages that you really need to focus on. So our emphasis on the child-friendly approach published by UNICEF was used, but we reframed it for what we actually needed locally. So we got the commission together. It was chaired by Jermaine Jackman, who won The Voice in 2014. He also went to an Islington school. And fundamentally, these were the three questions that we asked the commission to help us find some of those answers to. So really focused, we actually embedded the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child in terms of identifying these three themes. So we basically called it place, power and possibilities, to look at the kind of areas that affect well-being. And through this, we actually then set out some clear research themes to guide our insight gathering and our evidence to inform the actual creation of the ideas and the solution themselves. This was our kind of roadmap for where we wanted to get to. So we had a bit of a kind of explore ideas phase and a publication and legacy phase. And I was tasked with keeping us on track with that, which was quite interesting to say the least, when you've got a variety of different people involved in this. And I'll come on to this a little bit more in a bit. And this is just kind of who we had on the actual commission itself. And as you can see, we really tried to get a mix of leadership with and from young people, parents and carers. As I said, it was led by Jermaine Jackman and also Kadima Woodburn, who were both young adults with lived experience of growing up in inner London. And then we had what we called kind of experts by experience, where they were young people, residents who were at the table with academics and, you know, people now call them thought leaders, but, you know, policy shakers and makers really came on board with that. So, as I said, something like this can only be achieved by, one, enabling the statutory role of the DCS and the statutory role of the lead member to fulfil their place leadership and their function by steering and promoting and creating the coalitions of change with both within the council but with our local partners, working across the council departments, working across other public, private and social sector organisations, and really just making sure that the focus is on understanding lived experiences, particularly the hidden voices. So considering who's not at the table, who's usually at the table, and working with children, young people, families in the wider community within that. So we really want to kind of make sure that some of the lived experiences of some of those young people that the council generally don't find that they connect with as well as they do. We put a lot of emphasis on that. And I mean, at the end of the day, the values we live and work by are worth more when we pass it on. So you do need a vehicle to drive this. So our vehicle was the actual commission itself. Just a little bit about kind of what we did. So as I said, we kind of made sure that we were trying to do the aspect about understanding the issues, but also co-producing the ideas and co-creating the solutions as well. So as I said on the previous slide, we had a call for evidence and information and insight that had already been gathered from the wider community. People wrote viewpoint essays in terms of their perspective on what needed to change. We had some quite creative sessions as well. So we had a youth and parent-led borough tour, which used digital and online technology, and that culminated in a place summit. And basically, young people took us to the places in Islington that they liked and took us on a tour about why they liked it, why they didn't like it, and how it could be designed differently. And it brought together planners, architects, our transport planning team, children's services, public health, and also people from kind of our parks and leisure services to actually be taken on the tour with everybody and actually come up with some solutions that could be redesigned in terms of public realm together. We had specific co-creation focus groups as well, and interviews. And we also use people's existing consultations, as it were. And for the, as you saw about the power and possibilities, we had what we called a Fair Futures hack, which was a co-creation workshop where what happened with that was we had the adults on focused on different themes, coming up with the solution or designing the solution to the issues that had previously been identified by the young people. And then what they didn't know is that the young people were going to come in and assess their ideas. Freaked so many of them out when that happened. But then what happened was that when the young people came in to actually assess their ideas, they then worked on tweaking the ideas together. And a lot of those ended up in the actual final recommendations report itself. And as I said, part of this for us was also creating a bit of a culture shift. So particularly with people and officers who don't tend to work with children and young people on a day-to-day basis, actually trying to influence their way of working and their practice in terms of engaging and involving young people in the development and the design of their services in the different ways that could be done. So these were just kind of like a variety of the solutions that were co-created and came through the commission. So we focused on several themes that came out. So 21st century skills for work in the future world of work, 21st century skills for growing up, a child-friendly place to live and grow up in, and I've nearly forgotten the other one, but it's going to come to me, and I should know these off the back of my hand, so forgive me. But quite a lot of these, as I said, came through the actual process, and they were also connected back to the subject matter experts, either within the council or health, to just check in on how pragmatic or realistic it was going to be to implement any of these. And just get a bit of a take from them before we actually responded in full. So, for example, in terms of 21st century skills for work and the future of work, what we've come up and we've now implemented is that all Islington young people will be guaranteed at least 100 hours experience of the world of work by the time they reach the age of 16, and that covers a whole range of things, not just work experience, but mentoring, career taster sessions, connecting with different businesses on a variety of different things. And in terms of 21st century skills for growing up, one of the things that's come out of that and is still in place is 11 cultural experiences by age 11. So that's going on through our cultural sector connected with our schools. Child-friendly place to live and grow up was a very, very big major thing, because it was trying to affect an institution, basically a sector that is not used to even just dealing with people in general, is what I'd say in terms of planning and development. So this one was quite a big thing, particularly for our planning department, in terms of how we could actually navigate this in a better way and actually design places in Islington that were a lot more child friendly than they currently were. And that was the other one, to connected communities. So different ways to actually connect communities together, but also connect families and children and young people with practitioners, and doing that in a way that was very updated from the traditional ways of service provision. And essentially what this done for us is that it made us think, before we started being clear about what it was that we wanted to get out of the journey, and then really designing what we needed around that, with young people being at the centre in terms of how we were going to do it, because it can be quite how can I put it? It can be quite sometimes a bit of a knee jerk to say, right, this is what we'll do, and we'll do it in that way, without thinking, actually, do you know what is it that everybody needs to get out of it? So, as I said, it started off with the politicians coming to me and saying they wanted to do X, but this can't be just about what the politicians want out of this process. It has to be about what's going to be right for the community in the long term. And as I said, it's just really making a decision about who you are doing this for, and what do even children and young people get out of this themselves. And once you start unpacking that, it becomes a bit easier to then decide on the approach that you're actually going to take. And essentially, as I said before, this has to be about for the benefit of children, families, and that thriving community. It's a challenge that and that's across all areas of children and young people, not just specifically the Children's Services Department, how we're all involving children and young people's and being invested in their lives, and what outcomes actually need to be emerging for them in the long term. So I'm going to pass over to Fazana, who's going to take you on the Redbridge journey, which is equally as interesting.
Thank you, Tanya. That was really interesting, and there's lots in there that I'm either going to try and steal or come and ask you questions about. Some fantastic stuff. I will share my screen. Let me know when you can see that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, awesome. So we decided to work with UNICEF UK on their child-friendly cities and communities program. My name is Fazana. I work actually in the policy team in Redbridge, policy, equality and communities team, rather than in children's or services or education. And this is a little bit about our journey, why we did what we did, and kind of where we've gotten up to, and maybe a little bit of a toolkit at the end that you can take away and think about how you might apply. So where did it come from? We had two big drivers. One was our voluntary sector. So they were talking about this, 10 years ago, and thinking about how Redbridge could be a child-friendly borough. They were having the conversations and they were testing the ideas out with, for instance, some of the activities that we're doing now with children and young people. So the idea was there. That then influenced our politicians, who were the second driver. So it's in our current administration's manifesto for Redbridge to quickly become a UNICEF UK recognised child-friendly borough. Which, if you've worked on on this work, it's not something you do quickly. It's there for the long term. So those were two of our drivers, and we've embedded that in our kind of joint partnership plan across the borough and also into our corporate plan. Redbridge, when you talk about Redbridge, a lot of the time people don't know where you're talking about. So they either have not heard of it, or they may have heard of a town in it, for instance, Ilford or Wanstead, but people don't really have a concept of Redbridge. It's a quiet borough on one end of London. It's always been known as a good place to raise your children. So good schools, people move there when they do well because of the schools. Working people, lots of green spaces, so the green leafy borough. And a lot of the boroughs that came to this programme came because there was an issue that they were dealing with, whether it's in their children's services, whether it's because they have poor outcomes in a particular area, or because they've got problems with their schools. We didn't have any of that. So we've got an outstanding children's services. We've got 96% good or outstanding schools. But we knew that just because we were delivering good services, it doesn't mean it's good for everyone. So about 10 years ago, we started to pick up things around grooming, county lines, that emerged in later years. And we were also, there's this thinking that there are still communities within, all of our boroughs where despite everyone doing well, there are still people that aren't doing as well. So, I'd encourage you to think, for instance, about children who are carers. Do they get the same opportunities? Children with, if you want to pick up that rock, if you're brave enough, go and have a look at in your alternative provision in your schools. How many of those children have got special needs? I think, if you don't know and you go and have a look, the answers will shock you, because that's across the piece for everyone. And so we were thinking about, is it a lovely place for everyone? Possibly not. So the programme itself, we're one of, I think, 6 at the moment on the programme, with about 4 more due to join in the next 2 or 3 months. So it's a growing programme, and there's lots of boroughs outside of that group that have approached us to talk about it. So we know there's interest. The idea is that it's focused on local authorities. So it's what they call globally municipal programme, but very much focused on councils, which we've done it slightly different here. But the idea is for our decision makers to put the voice of children and young people and their views at the heart of what they do. So as part of that, we have spoken to well over 2,000 children and young people across Redbridge, including during the pandemic and through all age groups. So children up to the age of 25 for all age groups. And in doing that piece of work, we, over a year and a half through the pandemic, we kind of identified the key priorities from what they were saying. And we did that through both the engagement work we did, and then we brought those young people back together to reflect on what they've told us and to vote for what they thought was most important. So for Redbridge, their priorities were safety. So you've got their knife crime, hate crime, safety on school routes, but also harassment of girls and young women. We were having this discussion a year ago before the pandemic, face to face with girls telling us about their experience. So even before it became very large and topical in people's minds. Health, so both physical activity, obesity, mental health and well-being. So alongside what children and young people told us, we also put what the data told us to kind of look at, you know, a physical activity, but we also know we've got quite high levels of childhood obesity. Mental health wasn't something that came up in the original discussions. It tends to come up on and off over years. So all of you that work with children will have seen some years it comes up, some years it's maybe crime looms larger, but it wasn't so big until we hit the pandemic, and then it was all consuming. That was such a big thing for all children, mental health and well-being. In terms of place, it was around climate and green spaces. Young people were so passionate about protecting our green spaces, really vocal about litter, but also they said to us, we want more to do. So a lot of our children go out of borough for things to do. And so that was quite key. And then, so those were our 3 key badges, but the other story or message that came through to us really loud and clear was around diversity. So children said to us the thing that they love most about Redbridge, and we're the 3rd most diverse borough in the country, is how diverse the borough is, how well people get on, and that really mattered to them. So those were the key themes that came through the kind of engagement we did with them over the course of kind of 6 months, and just as we were about to close it off, pandemic hit, so we ended up doing it for another year before we could really wrap up. And so where are we up to? So you can see UNICEF have got this nice image of each of their stages. We did the discovery. There was another little kind of, that's not there in this current diagram, but another section in between, which was around voting, and it took us 2 or 3 months to reflect back and get everyone together and vote. And we're now in development. So we're currently coming to the end of our action planning. And we've done months of co-design with our young people, with our partners, with other anchor institutes on that. But you can see there was lots else going on. We've got elections on the horizon. We've just come through a pandemic. We're currently in the middle of youth elections for both the Youth Council, but also the group that forms the governance for this work, which is the Child Friendly Redbridge Ambassadors Group. So lots going on and impacted by what's happening in the real world. And who has a voice? So this was an exercise we did pretty much at the beginning, and we're probably due to do this again now because so much has changed in the last 18 months, very strange 18 months that we've had. So very early on, we brought together young people, practitioners, lots of different groups over lots of sessions, and we asked some really simple questions. You know, who do we work with? Who do we support and help? And who do we listen to? And who doesn't have so much of a voice? And what was really interesting for us was both in terms of what came through, a lot of what we knew and some less so. So you can see there in the breakdown things like, you know, there's characteristics like someone who might be a carer, or someone who is Roma, but also, you know, where you live, and the kind of person you are, your educational situation, lots of different variables that people considered. The other thing that was interesting was how this changed. So someone who might be a young carer might say, I don't think that I really have good support. And we had kind of 2 or 3 groups in the room that supported young carers that said, no, we support you, and moved it across. And so we had that back and forth in that discussion, and that helped us to understand the complexity. So kind of a year and a half on, I think we should probably do this exercise again and see what's changed, because I think there's lots of groups of children who were doing well before who might have fallen really far behind now because of the pandemic. So once the pandemic hit, one of the things that we did, we were supposed to do our, you know, very neatly, we do our discovery and our learning, then we do our action planning, then we do delivery, but we haven't waited. So we're due to start delivery in the new year. We haven't waited. As we learned what was going on with young people, we started pulling together either projects or feeding back into services and saying, let's do something about this. So we continued to, you know, deliver throughout the process. We also, you know, March the 30th, I think we were due to have our big day, bringing everyone together and voting for our badges and our key areas. It was about a week before we went into pandemic. So everything ground to a halt. We couldn't meet with our young people. Our young people we'd had 1 meeting with them, our new steering group. And so barely onboarded and not much chance for development and building their confidence, and completely ground to a halt. So what we ended up doing is we had to relearn how to do everything through COVID, work out what worked with young people, how much of it we could do online, how much of it we could do interactively, or, you know, sending them things to do. And so we had to really kind of think on our feet and work with our young people in very difficult circumstances, when more and more you see them switching their screens off, not engaging, falling away, just really saying that I can't today. And so really a lot of support required there. And during the pandemic, one of the things we found, so the survey there was a survey we did partially with our CCG, so 3 boroughs combined, but partially we took the second part of the survey and got the young people to put their own questions in, so that we could gather our own data led by them. And you can see the scale, the difference in responses, the high level of responses we got from Redbridge. Part of the reason for that was because we had the young ambassadors leading on the survey. They designed the question, so they brought in, and then we got them to share it with their peers. So it was peer engagement, them sharing with others and saying, come just fill this in. And we got a really good, not only a good return, but significant insight into some of the really difficult things they were facing. And so we did some, out of what we learned from that, we did some bespoke pieces of work. So for example, they were very worried about going back to school. We got them to work on a back to school leaflet that covered everything they were concerned about. So there's some examples there. We also, because we were able to do that engagement with them, did some kind of business as usual that we would have done with them anywhere. So designing developments, designing spaces, a commission that we had, growth commission. I would urge you to go and have a look. It's brilliant work that came out of that, including with young people. So lots going on, even despite the fact that we couldn't do it in the normal way. And I suppose one of the things, so this is, I'll share this with you. One of the questions we got, and one of the ways we did this that was quite interesting, most of the other boroughs who are on this program, and often other boroughs, even when they're not on the program, they tend to have someone in children's services or education leading on this, which is not wrong, because that's where the expertise and the real kind of insight and knowledge lie. What we ended up doing was we had our program team in the corporate centre. So none of us were children's experts. We were policy officers and the like, and program officers. But what that did was meant we had to be very humble. We had to listen to the practitioners. We had to learn from them, and we had to let them take the lead and give them the support. One of the things that came back from what it also meant was that we were in a very strong position in the corporate centre to push it out to non-typical services. So Tanya mentioned trying to get that thinking out to services that weren't in children's and education. Child's rights, what does a child's rights based approach look like in highways or region or waste? And so where we were in a good position was because we were in the corporate centre. We worked with every service on other things like business planning and performance management. We could push this out to them, and every conversation we had, we could get them to think about this. So that went really well. But then the pushback we got, and our head of planning, he was brilliant. He really pushed this. He went up to speak to one of his developers, waxing lyrical about this, said, you've got to work with the team. And they came back and said, yeah, we'd love to, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And so we were in a position that we could answer that question with quite tangible, specific things. And so this toolkit was came about as a result of us answering that question. So how do you embed this? What does that look like in practical terms? Across all your services and across your partners. So these are the key, if you like, building blocks that you can take away and think about what you offer to your services that don't typically work with children. So the first one was the one that was most in demand, engagement, support and guidance. So this is where someone from highways or region might come to you and say, do I need a DBS? Where do I find these young people? We take all of that out of it for them. So we say to them, tell us what it is that you want, and we will work with you to design engagement that's meaningful and find the right young people. So for instance, if it's planning a region, we'll say work with our Send Youth Forum, because they have said to us that sometimes we can't get into spaces that other young people can. And so we'll take all of that kind of the difficult part of that out, and it will be really fun. You'll really enjoy working with our young people, and we'll make sure it's diverse groups of young people. We continue to gather data and insights. Everything we learned in discovery from speaking to those young people, we fed back into services, whether what was relevant for their services. So, region, here's what we're hearing from children about some of your developments, some of their concerns around lighting, around nooks and crannies that get created, or a summary of everything. So it might be talking to health, but actually let's share some information about what children have said about place. And that can be quite powerful as well. And we will continue to do that as we learn to keep sharing. And that's been received really well. The next building block is training on a child's rights-based approach. So UNICEF deliver that for us. So there's an introductory training, but there's also specific training for people who do comms, for people who are engagement managers or engage with children. and training on undertaking a child's rights impact assessment. So a wide range of training, and that training has been a nice hook for us, because people who are then kind of thinking, what's this got to do with us, or how do I do this? They go on the training, we find out they come out quite almost as advocates and champions. So our head of region went on it. He went back and he said to his head of planning, his head of region, and his head of community hubs, you all have to go on it. And then they then came back and got their teams to go on it. So it's really been useful. We have a child's rights impact assessment that we've been developing, but UNICEF kind of beat us to it, and they've got a really short, sharp one that you can find on their website. So we offer that alongside the training to our services, but we also support them to fill those out. Comms, so in two directions, both comms with young people, because what you find is as a council, you put out a message and children don't hear it. Or say, did you go, there's all these events, and they'll say, we didn't know about them. So both in terms of how we reach them, and we've done lots of work with children to ask them how best to reach them, that we can filter back. But we also have a wide range of channels across our partnership, so our youth clubs, the NHS and others, across all of us, that we can mobilise when we need. But also in the other direction, it's really gratifying for our partners and our services to be able to share their good practices with UNICEF and be able to share what they're doing. So we have both of that. We have that national and global platform to be able to talk about what we're doing. And then finally, the best practice. It's nice to be part of a squad of councils doing this, so we can go to the other councils in the team and say, in the program, and say, we've got this really difficult dilemma. Have you done anything on it? So one of the first ones during COVID was, how are you communicating with children and young people now that we've got lockdown? What are the key things that you're finding are issues? But then even things like, how have you engaged children and young people in your budget? We can't do it the way we're doing. It's really boring. And so they've come back and said, try this. So that's been quite useful. So they are kind of building blocks, but they're tangible things you can give to your services. So in terms of where we're going, just to wrap up a little bit, we are just about to finish our action plan, and we'll go to Cabinet in December. The action plan will be launched publicly in spring, so our young people will tell us how they want to do that. We've just voted in our child-friendly Redbridge ambassadors, so I think it's 19 schools, including a special school, with something like 40 young ambassadors, just under 40, and we had 3,500 votes, so it was a really good process. And we're just about at the end of November to meet them face-to-face, actually, for the first time, and then we'll see if they want to do face-to-face or online. And then we'll move into delivery in the start of next year. We plan to check in with UNICEF every 6 months to see how well we're doing, but actually we want to present back to children and young people every 6 months to say, right, and annually say, in a bigger way, to say, tell us, are you feeling the impact? But as importantly, we want to mainstream these ideas through everything we need to do. So it's got their business planning, commissioning, performance management, our council-wide engagement approach, comms. We're working on all of those things, and over the next year we'll find ways to embed them, so that if we were to step away as a program, we would carry on doing these things. So some questions that we wanted to share and ask your help with, because these are things that we are still working through, or that we've kept challenging ourselves with. And so I think Noel's going to put us into breakout groups with just our questions there. How have you managed to retain stakeholder buy-in through the pandemic? Because we found that a lot of our partners, particularly in the voluntary sector, who were at the head of this, really struggled in the pandemic with the issues that they were dealing with, whether it was funding, whether it was massively racked up work program. So how did you manage to keep them bought into the things you were doing, particularly around this type of work? How did you manage to continue engaging with children and young people during the pandemic, and how and it being meaningful, and have you been able to maintain that? Can you share your good practice in implementing children's rights in your work? So just looking for good examples for us to learn from. And do you have any good examples of children and young people involved in your governance or decision making? Because this is the one we could do all these positive, really interesting things that look great, but what difference is it really making at the heart of what we do? So I'm going to stop sharing, and am I good to hand back to you now?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Fazana, and thanks to Tanya. Some really thought-provoking presentations on the journeys that you've taken, and some great commonalities, but also some different flavours as well. So I am going to put you in breakout groups, and I'm going to share kind of a message to all the breakout groups, so that you've got the kind of the Miro boards that Fazana just mentioned, and so you've got the questions that you don't need to kind of remember them. and we'll come back at 5 minutes to for some next steps. So I'm just opening all those breakout groups. So slowly this room should close down and we'll all go into our breakouts.
Am I in the wrong?
Yeah, I'm wondering the same. I just clicked on a meeting that opened, but
Yeah.
I'm going to leave and try again.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, see you.